So some guys ask, like, what do you keep involved for 5 years or something?
Yeah. How about this? I don't believe
I repeat Rabbi Lipstein's great line that he was in the middle of his sermon and a child started to cry and make noise. So he said, crying children, like all good ideas, should be carried out. So Gemar Sima Tova to everyone. It should be a good year for all of us. Parshas Hazinu, which is to all purposes the last parsha of the Torah before Zos HaBrocha. So the parsha begins, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Hazinu Hashamayim v'adaberu v'sishma haaretz imrefi. He calls on heaven and earth to be the witnesses to what he wants to say. And Rashi says immediately, why Shamayim v'Oretz? Because they were here from the beginning and they'll be here at the end. Then it's interesting that Moshe begins also by saying, Zachor Yemos Olam, Binu Shnos Dor Vador, Shal Avicha V'Yagetcha, Skenecha V'Yomrulach. Remember what happened before. Yemos Olam. We have to remember from the beginning of time till today. To understand the lives of generations past. And we should always be in touch with the previous generations. So the question naturally arises, why is all of this preamble necessary? The Torah, after all, is not a book of poetry or of prose. And Chazal teach us every letter in the Torah, and we can learn something from it. So Moshe could start saying right away, it's going to be a parsha of Musar. He's going to tell the Jewish people what they did wrong. Bonim lo emun bom, my children that I cannot trust. And then Moshe is going to say what will be an exile and a redemption and the Jewish people return to God. Okay, so say that message. What's the preamble? Why the preface? Why does he say heaven should hear and earth? Why does he say we should remember everything? Don't have to know. In today's world, the social sciences, so to speak, are not the primary subject matter in school anymore. We're not interested to know, about the origins of history. And no one studies the classics anymore. There was a time then you had to learn Latin or Greek, and you had to know what was the history of Rome. Who cares? It's all superfluous today. So the Mefarshim point out that this is a basic lesson in Jewish attitude towards the world. That in order to see generations in perspective, in order to be able to deal with the realities of the current, there has to be a perspective. Without that perspective, everything is misunderstood. The narrative becomes a false one. I always use as an example the first time that I went into the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. So they have one room, magnificent room, dedicated to the Impressionist artists, Degas, Renoir, Monet, Pissarro, a riot of color, genius. There's a rope that is erected like 20 feet in front of the paintings, so that you cannot walk up to the painting itself. You have to stand behind the rope, behind the barrier. So in my naivete, I thought that's in order to protect the paintings. There always have been bereft people in the world that somehow damage paintings. So therefore they put up a barrier, and I remarked to the guard that does he think that barrier is strong enough? Because it looked to me, it was just like a velvet rope on two pillars. So anybody that wanted to get around it, you can get around it. So he said, you misunderstand. That rope is not there to protect the paintings. That rope is that if you look at an Impressionist painting, if you're not standing behind the rope, you won't get it. If you walk up to the painting, it's nothing but little globs of paint. So you have to step back the 20 feet, so to speak, and then all of a sudden you see the genius. You see what the painting is. So that's the metaphor for what Moshe is saying here. If you just look at it straight, it's only going to be globs of little paint. You won't understand what's happening to you. You won't see yourself in any perspective. And in order to appreciate Jewish life, in order to appreciate what does God want from us, you have to have a sense of perspective. One of the difficulties in our world today is the complete lack of perspective. People don't even remember what happened 10 years ago. We only deal with now. You deal with now, then you're only seeing globs of paint. You're not seeing the picture. You don't understand what happens. Now Moshe says, Shamayim v'oretz, heaven and earth. So we live in a time when the arrogance of people is such that we believe that we somehow control climate. We can change it. There are hurricanes, we can stop hurricanes. It's hot, we'll make it cool. It's cool, we'll make it warmer. If you just think about it, that is arrogance beyond arrogance. Because the truth of the matter is that we're puny. We're not given that. That's not part of our toolbox. And yet, we convince the world that that's it. And not only that, we convince the world that the world will be destroyed unless we do something about it, as though we're in charge. So Moshe said, Hazinu Hashamayim v'tishma haaretz. Heaven and earth are immutable. They are what they are. They're the testimony because they are God's creation. They're the symbols of God's creation. The heavens is the universe, unimaginable in size, in complexity, and we're 1/1,000,000th of 1% of that universe. We think that we're, the vastness of the universe is beyond our imagination. And the earth, which is so complicated and which contains everything that is necessary for human existence and progress, they are my witnesses. Because people will come along, Moshe says, and change the narrative. They'll say, well, it never happened. Or if it happened, they'll give you a distorted picture of what happened. And it's very easy to convince people who were not present. So how do we know? So the whole change in society and how to look at society is based upon a new narrative. In other words, everything that was said before is false. You have to take down the statue of Christopher Columbus. And George Washington was not a hero. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. And here in Israel, we were the aggressors. We're coming up now 50 years from the Yom Kippur War, when we almost lost everything. But that's not the narrative. So Moshe wants to make sure that the perspective is there, that somehow there is a correct narrative, that it's clear what happened here. And therefore he says, Chor Yemos Olam Binu Shnos Dor V'Dor. For that you have to know the past. You have to be able to understand every generation. And Binu Shnos Dor V'Dor is that every generation is different than other generations. And that you cannot judge the generation of 1948 by the standards of 2023. Because you don't understand their generation. You don't understand what was going, what they faced. And one of the great difficulties that exists in any society is how to transmit the past to our educational system. What does it say in our history book? Because history makes moral judgments. So Yesterday at the United Nations, our partner in peace, Abbas, made a speech in which he said that the Nakba, the day of the Nakba, which the Palestinians commemorate their defeat in the 1948 war, should be made a universal worldwide holiday. So it's going to be that the Nakba is the narrative, and the independence and creation and the miracle of the state of Israel is not part of the story at all. And there'll be plenty of Jews that'll buy into that have already bought into it, who believe that. So that's what Moshe says, Am novel v'lo chacham. You become a despicable people. You have no wisdom. Dori keshu psalto. A generation that's crooked, that sees everything wrong. You know, when I always use the example of the city of Chicago, where I grew up. The city of Chicago is laid out on a perfect grid of parallel streets and then cross streets. Everything is 90 degrees. And it's numbered in such a way that you know exactly where you are. There are, however, a number of streets, 2 or 3 streets, that are angle streets, that are not at 90 degrees, that cut through the city on an angle, a 30-degree angle. If you are riding on an angle street, every intersection that you crossed is wrong. It's crooked. So you therefore say, how did they lay out a city like this, that none of the intersections really intersect? You don't realize that you're on the angle street. If you get off the angle street and go on a regular street, it all is perfect. That's Dori Keshu Psalto, a generation that's crooked. You're on the angle street, Moshe said. So then how can I explain it to you? You have no perspective, and you see everything on an angle, and you're arrogant about it. So that's the Musar of Hazinu. You want to change heaven and earth. The only way to change anything is to change yourself. And we know what a task that is. How difficult that is. You know, the Bali Musar have an example for Yom Kippur, that a man had a business, and it was a successful business. And it was run by a competent manager. And then the competent manager left, and he hired somebody. Somebody came in to run the company. The first year, the guy took a business that made a profit and turned it into a business that made a loss. So the owner of the company came, and he wants to fire him. And the man says, no, give me another chance. So he said, okay, here. And he takes the business again, and it makes a greater loss. And he does this a number of years in a row. So eventually, the owner comes to fire him. So the Bali Musar say, that's what we come every Yom Kippur. So the year was a loss. We took a business that was good, and it turned out not to be so good, not so profitable. We didn't live up to what we should have done. The projections were wrong. So we say to the boss, give me another year. Rabbi Shalom gives it to us. And then what happens the next year? And what happens the year afterwards? And we say that in the bracha. Ma'avir hashmoseinu b'chol shana v'shana. Every year is the same thing. Last year we said we're sorry. Last year said we're going to do better. And the Rabbi Shalom is ma'avir hashmoseinu b'chol shana v'shana. He doesn't fire us. He still has hope that we'll turn the business around. And that's what Moshe is trying to communicate here. That's the great chesed of the Ribono Shalom to Klal Yisrael, to humanity generally. The idea that somehow things will be better. The investment will turn out. A man came to me with a problem. Most people come to rabbis with problems, not with solutions, which is itself a problem. And he says he belongs to a certain investment group, and they bought a piece of property, and the piece of property was profitable, and they had a return on it on a regular basis. But over the last 2 years, because the fact that the interest rates have skyrocketed, they were paying 2%, and now they have to pay 8%. So the property is no longer profitable. And therefore, you have to put in more money. You have to add to the investment. And if you don't come up with the extra amount that they want, then you would lose a certain percentage of your original investment. So what should the person do? So if I knew what the person would do, I'd publish it in the Wall Street Journal, and I'd be the world's greatest expert on the economy. But how do I know? Maybe the interest rates would go to 10%, to 12%. I remember in the United States, 14 and 15 and 16% interest in the 1970s. And how should I know? But on the other hand, if we don't reinvest, then everything that we put into it, we lose. So that's Yom Kippur too. That's Hazinu. Moshe says we have to reinvest. Until now, maybe it wasn't as profitable as it should be. The interest rate is too high. Too many problems. That's how people talk about the state of Israel. I hear it all the time. All the problems. So you have to reinvest in it. Don't tell me about the problems. Let's go ahead. That's Ma'avir Hashmoseinu b'chol shana v'shana. The Rebbeinu Shalom reinvests in us. So they say in the name of Barditchever that Reb Levi Yitzchak would get up in the morning and he would say, you know, Levi Yitzchak, yesterday was not such a good day. But today, Levi Yitzchak, it's going to be a better day, going to do better. And then he would say, but Levi Yitzchak, isn't that what you said yesterday? But then he would say, but today I mean it. So we have to mean it. And we reinvest in ourselves, in our abilities, in our opportunities, in our families, in everything that we touch. Because we don't want to lose the principle. We don't want to lose what has been invested for thousands of years on our behalf. So that's part of Zchor Yemos Olam Binu Shnos Dor Vador. Part of the memory is that look how much has been invested until now. Look at what has happened to us. Gonna throw it all away? How can that be? So that's why I think Hazinu always precedes Shabbos Shuvah and Yom Kippur, because it is the message. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us. Moshe Rabbeinu says God will forgive you. The slate will be wiped clean. But that's just the beginning of the story. That's not the end of the story. Now what? They didn't fire you. You're still running the business. So you want to run it at a loss again? You want to destroy it? It's irrational. It's against human nature. And that really is why in Jewish tradition, the Parsha of Hazinu was taught to children that they should memorize it. There were two parts of the Torah that traditionally Jewish children memorized. The Parsha of Hazinu and the blessings of Yaakov Avinu to his children. So we live at a time when memory doesn't exist anymore, because we have that little gadget that remembers everything. So we don't have to remember anything. But that's not true, because basically it is our memory. God forbid if we think that we don't have it anymore. And that gift alone is enough to give us perspective, is enough to allow us to see that we're not looking at globs of little dots, but that we see an enormous painting, a work of genius. That's Shemayim V'Oretz. That's Klal Yisrael. And therefore, Hazinu is an excellent preparation for Yom Kippurim, because it explains why it's Ma'avir Hashmasenu B'chol Shona V'Shona. And it gives us renewed hope for the future and strength for the coming good year. So, Gemar Chsima Tova to everyone. We will resume the Parshas Breishis, God willing. It's 2 weeks, right? Yeah. Thank you.
I think.